I let my cousin borrow my car. For one weekend, days later, he claimed I ruined his life, until one dashcam video destroyed his biggest lie. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 29 years old, and if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that the people who insist family always comes first are often the same ones who expect you to carry burdens they'd never carry themselves. Looking back, the accident didn't destroy my family. It simply exposed the choices everyone made afterward. Ryan and I grew up more like siblings than cousins. Our mothers were sisters, and nearly every holiday, birthday, and summer break found us together at our grandmother's house, racing bicycles down her quiet street, or staying up far too late telling ghost stories in the living room. Back then, I never questioned that we'd always have each other's backs. I truly believed we would. I was wrong. Ryan was 2 years younger than me, 27, and somehow life always seemed to work in his favor. Teachers loved his confidence, relatives adored his charm, and even when he messed up, people usually laughed it off as part of his personality. "That's just Ryan," they'd say with an affectionate smile. I filled a very different role in the family. I was the dependable one, the person everyone called when they needed help moving, a ride to the airport before sunrise, or someone patient enough to fix grandma's leaking sink or teach mom how to use a new phone. For years, I took pride in being reliable. It never occurred to me that dependable people often become the easiest ones to take for granted. 3 months ago, on a Thursday evening, Ryan called while I was making dinner. "Hey, Nat," he said cheerfully, "can I ask you a favor?" I had a feeling I already knew where the conversation was headed. "What kind of favor?" "My SUV's in the shop. Transmission problems." He let out an exaggerated sigh before adding, "I was supposed to drive to Cedar Falls this weekend. Emily's expecting me." Emily was his girlfriend. They'd been together for almost a year, and she lived about 2 hours away. "So?" I asked. "So?" He hesitated just long enough to sound polite. "Think I could borrow your Accord for the weekend?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I glanced out my apartment window at my silver 2019 Honda Accord, sitting in its usual parking space. I loved that car, not because it was flashy or expensive, but because I'd worked hard for every payment. I'd bought the Accord, certified pre-owned, after years of saving, and I took care of it meticulously. Every oil change was on time, every inspection report was neatly filed away, and I never skipped maintenance because replacing a car wasn't something I could casually afford. Ryan noticed my hesitation. "It'll only be 2 days." "I don't know." Before he could press further, my aunt called. "Natalie, sweetheart," she said warmly, "Ryan told me you're thinking about lending him your car." "I'm still deciding." "He really needs it. You're not even using it this weekend." There it was again, that familiar guilt disguised as concern. A minute later, my mother called. "Just help him out. I haven't even said no. He'd do the same for you." Would he? I wasn't convinced. Ryan had never been the dependable one in the family. I was. Still, years of hearing family comes first made saying no feel selfish, and by Friday afternoon, I'd talked myself into agreeing. Ryan showed up wearing sunglasses and a grin that suggested he'd expected my answer all along. "You are seriously saving my life." "I think you're exaggerating." "Maybe," he laughed, "but I appreciate it." As I handed him the keys, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, fired off a quick reply, and slipped it back into his pocket without missing a beat. It wasn't unusual, but something about how automatic the movement was stayed with me. "One condition," I said, holding on to the keys for another second. "Name it." "Drive carefully. This car means a lot to me." He laughed. "Relax, I'm a great driver." "You've said that before, and I've never even gotten a ticket." "I hope it stays that way." "It will." At the time, I believed him. Before climbing into the driver's seat, he held up the keys. "I'll bring her back Sunday evening in one piece." "I'll hold you to that." I watched until the Accord disappeared around the corner. An uneasy feeling lingered in my stomach, but I dismissed it. The next day was uneventful. I met a friend for coffee, ran errands, caught up on laundry, and by evening, I'd almost forgotten Ryan had my car. Then, just after 6, my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored calls like that. This time I answered. "Natalie?" Ryan's voice was so weak my heart immediately sank. "Ryan, what's wrong?" "I'm at Memorial Hospital." The grocery bag slipped from my hand. "What happened?" "There was an accident." Nothing else mattered. "Are you okay?" "My wrists are broken. They think I have a concussion." I closed my eyes in relief. "I'm on my way." 25 minutes later, I found him in the emergency department with both wrists wrapped and bruises covering one side of his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You scared me to death." After making sure he'd recover, I finally asked the question I'd been holding back. "What happened?" "The brakes failed." The answer came almost too quickly. Traffic slowed down. I hit the pedal. Nothing happened. I tried everything. I didn't argue. 3 weeks earlier, the Accord had passed a complete inspection. Oil, tires, fluids, brakes, everything had checked out perfectly. Something didn't add up. I wanted to believe him, but one question wouldn't leave my mind. What if he isn't telling me the whole truth? I simply nodded. "I'm just glad you're alive." The drive home was quiet except for one sentence echoing in my head. The brakes failed. Then I remembered the dash cam. After a minor fender bender 2 years earlier, I'd installed a dual-facing dashcam with automatic cloud backup that recorded every drive. I hurried upstairs, logged into the cloud account, and found a new upload waiting. Saturday, 3:42 p.m. I stared at the screen for several minutes. Part of me wanted to close the laptop and keep believing Ryan. Instead, I clicked play. At first, everything looked normal. Ryan drove away from my apartment with the radio playing softly, humming along as traffic flowed smoothly. About 20 minutes into the drive, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, looked back up, and kept driving. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time he unlocked it, typed a reply, and continued on. Then came another notification, and another. Each glance lasted a little longer while the GPS quietly showed his speed climbing from 71 to 76 to 81, then 87 miles per hour in a 65-mile zone. My stomach tightened. Ahead, traffic was already slowing, brake lights stretching across the highway. Ryan never noticed. His attention stayed on his phone until he finally looked up and found stopped traffic directly in front of him. Oh no. He slammed on the brakes. The Accord dipped sharply, the tires screamed, and the car slowed exactly as it should have, but not enough to overcome his speed. He jerked the wheel, the rear tires lost traction, and the car spun into the guardrail. Metal twisted, glass shattered, airbags exploded, and seconds later, the recording froze with smoke drifting across the windshield. I sat motionless. The brakes hadn't failed. Ryan had. Relief came first because he was alive, then came fear. He hadn't guessed what happened. He'd invented a story before anyone had even inspected the car. 2 days later, an insurance adjuster called. Ryan had reported catastrophic brake failure. Worse, he'd claimed I already knew the brakes were defective before lending him the car. I immediately emailed every maintenance record I'd kept since buying the Accord. The inspection completed 3 weeks earlier clearly stated there were no defects and the vehicle was safe to operate. Then I called Rebecca Lawson, a family friend and experienced insurance attorney. After watching the dash cam, she removed her glasses and quietly said, "Your cousin isn't explaining an accident anymore, he's rewriting it. He told the insurance company the brakes failed." I know. And that I knowingly lent him an unsafe car. Rebecca nodded. If he convinces everyone it was mechanical failure, he avoids responsibility. If he convinces them you knew about the problem, some of that responsibility becomes yours. I still think he'll tell the truth. She gave me a sympathetic smile. I hope so, but hope isn't a legal strategy. Ryan never called. He never apologized. For 2 weeks, I kept telling myself he was embarrassed and just needed time. Then one Tuesday afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. A process server handed me a lawsuit. Ryan was demanding $45,000 for medical bills, lost income, pain and suffering, and emotional distress. According to the complaint, I'd knowingly ignored dangerous brake problems and assured him the vehicle was safe. I read it 3 times before it finally sank in. The first thing I'd asked him in the hospital had been whether he was alive. Now he'd turned me into the villain. I stared at the paused dashcam footage on my laptop and finally accepted what I'd been refusing to admit. If the truth was going to matter, I was the one who would have to prove it. He's overwhelmed, my aunt insisted. He still signed the complaint. She was quiet for a moment before trying a different approach. You know how expensive medical bills are. I do. His insurance isn't covering everything. So his solution is to sue me? You have to understand what he's going through. I understand exactly what's happening, I said, keeping my voice steady. My car is totaled, my insurance company is investigating me, and I'm being accused of knowingly lending someone an unsafe vehicle. He isn't lying. The brakes didn't fail. How can you be so sure? Instead of arguing, I opened my laptop, because I watched the entire accident. Silence. My car has a dual dash cam with automatic cloud backup. It recorded the road, the inside of the cabin, and every second before the crash. Ryan was speeding, he was texting, and the brakes worked exactly as they were supposed to. She barely whispered. A dash cam? Yes. She ended the call without apologizing or asking to see the footage. Less than 30 minutes later, Ryan started calling. My phone rang over and over until there were 10 missed calls, followed by a voicemail. Natalie, we need to talk. I heard you've got the video. Maybe we can work something out before this gets out of hand. The fear I'd heard in the hospital was gone. All that remained was urgency. I deleted the voicemail without responding. The next morning, my mother came over. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, and the expression of someone caught between 2 people she loved. I was hoping you'd answer. I always answer for you. She managed a tired smile before we sat at my dining table in uncomfortable silence. Finally, she sighed. Your aunt called. I figured. She thinks you're going to ruin Ryan's future. I looked at her. Mom, he's suing me. He lied to the insurance company and tried to make me responsible for his accident. I know. Then she quietly said the words I'd been expecting. Maybe you could settle. You mean pay him? Maybe not everything. Just enough to make this go away. I felt more disappointed than angry. When did I become the one responsible for fixing this? I just don't want this family torn apart. It already is. The moment Ryan signed those papers accusing me of something I didn't do, this stopped being a family disagreement. She rubbed her forehead. You've always been the bigger person. I gave a small, tired laugh. That's exactly why everyone keeps coming to me instead of him. I'm the one who's expected to give in. No one expects that. Really? When Ryan wanted my car, who got pressured? When he crashed it, who got blamed? And now that he's lying, who's being asked to compromise? She couldn't answer. Instead, tears filled her eyes. I hate seeing this family fall apart. So do I. I raised you to forgive people. And you also raised me to tell the truth. Neither of us spoke for a while. Before leaving, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I wish there were another way. So do I. After she left, the apartment felt painfully quiet. For the first time, I understood I wasn't simply defending myself against a lawsuit. I was fighting a version of events that people found easier to believe than the truth. Even so, something had changed. My mother still wanted peace, but for the first time, she couldn't defend what Ryan had done. That afternoon, Rebecca called. I filed our response. How did it go? We denied every allegation and filed a counterclaim. For the accord, for the car, your losses, and every legal remedy available. Over the following weeks, discovery began. Rebecca disclosed the dashcam footage, and Ryan's attorney immediately requested a copy. 2 days later, she called again. I think you'll like this. What happened? Ryan's attorney withdrew. He quit after watching the dashcam. I couldn't help smiling. So it's over? I wish. Ryan already hired another lawyer. A few days later, my insurance company completed its investigation. The findings matched the dashcam exactly. No mechanical defects, proper maintenance, excessive speed, repeated texting, and no evidence of brake failure. Ryan's claim was denied in full. The final paragraph caught my attention even more. The insurance company would seek reimbursement from Ryan for the value of my totaled accord. For the first time since the crash, the evidence seemed to matter more than his story. That feeling lasted less than a day. Late Tuesday night, someone pounded on my apartment door. Natalie, open the door! It was Ryan. I cracked the door open with the security chain still fastened. You need to call your insurance company. I can't. You can tell them to stop. No. This is insane. They're coming after me over a car. I met his eyes. They're coming after you because you lied. He clenched his jaw. I'm telling you, none of this was my fault. Even then, he refused to let go of the story. I've seen the footage. So have your lawyers and the insurance company. They all reached the same conclusion. That video proves nothing. It proves you were driving 87 miles an hour, texting behind the wheel, and that the brakes worked. For the first time, I saw fear replace his confidence. You've always thought you were better than me. No, I said quietly. I've just always accepted responsibility for my own mistakes. I'm never forgiving you. You don't have to, but you do have to leave. After several tense seconds, he kicked my door hard enough to leave a dent before storming away. I photographed the damage and immediately emailed the pictures to Rebecca. Something told me the hardest part was still ahead. By October, my family had split into two sides. No one argued about what had happened anymore. They argued about whether telling the truth was worth tearing the family apart. My aunt stopped speaking to my mother except through text messages. Thanksgiving plans disappeared. Christmas became uncertain, and even my 84-year-old grandmother sensed something was wrong. She called one afternoon. Honey, are you busy? Never too busy for you. She hesitated. I invited Ryan for Thanksgiving. Your aunt said she won't come if you're there. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. What happened between you two? How could I explain lawsuits, insurance fraud, and betrayal to someone who believed every family disagreement could be solved over coffee and pie? We just don't agree about what happened. She sighed. I miss when you kids only fought over board games. So do I. After we hung up, I realized that every legal victory seemed to cost another piece of my family. Rebecca called again later that week. They filed another motion. What now? They want our counterclaim dismissed. Their argument is that because you voluntarily lent Ryan the car, you accepted the risk. I laughed. So apparently I also agreed to him speeding and texting. Rebecca laughed too. That was almost exactly my response. A week later, the judge denied the motion, ruling that permission to borrow a car didn't include permission to drive it recklessly. The case moved into depositions. Rebecca prepared me carefully. Answer only what's asked. Don't guess. Don't argue. When the day arrived, I was surprised by how ordinary it felt. There were no dramatic courtroom moments. Just lawyers, a court reporter, stacks of documents, and Ryan sitting across from me. He never looked at me. Instead, he repeated the same story. The brakes didn't respond. They felt strange. Rebecca calmly played the dashcam. When the GPS showed 87 miles per hour, she paused the video. Mr. Carter, is that your speed? I don't know. It could be wrong. The dashcam uses GPS, and the GPS log matches it exactly. She moved on. How many times did you look at your phone during the last 3 minutes before the crash? I was checking directions. We subpoenaed your phone records. His expression changed instantly. They show outgoing texts at 3:45 and 3:46. The collision happened around 3:48. She looked directly at him. Who were you texting? Ryan couldn't answer. Finally, he asked for a break. Ryan stared at the table. For a second, I honestly thought he was finally going to tell the truth. Instead, he cleared his throat. I'd like a break. When the deposition resumed, he looked noticeably less confident. His attorney tried to repair the damage. So even if you were distracted, the brakes still felt abnormal? Yes. Rebecca picked up the inspection report. The brake system was fully operational. No mechanical failure was found. She lowered the document. Can you explain how every expert reached the wrong conclusion? I can't. She didn't need another question. Ryan's own testimony had already dismantled his case. My deposition was straightforward. I confirmed that I'd willingly lent him the car, believed it was completely safe because it had passed inspection only 3 weeks earlier, and produced every maintenance record I'd kept. Rebecca's final question was simple. When did you first watch the dashcam? The night of the accident. What did you believe afterward? I believed my cousin wasn't telling the truth. That sentence stayed with me long after the deposition ended. A few days later, Rebecca called. They want to settle. What are they offering? Ryan will drop his lawsuit if you withdraw your counterclaim and stop cooperating with your insurance company. I smiled. That's not a settlement. What is it? One last attempt to avoid responsibility. Rebecca laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. So our answer? No. The case moved to trial. A few weeks later, Rebecca asked me to stop by her office. This isn't official yet, but I wanted you to hear it from me. What happened? I referred the insurance claim to the district attorney for possible fraud. My stomach tightened. I never wanted Ryan arrested. I know, but filing a knowingly false insurance claim is a felony. Whether prosecutors act on it isn't our decision. That night I barely slept. For the first time, I wondered whether defending myself had also destroyed Ryan's future. The next afternoon, my grandmother called. I heard Ryan might go to prison. That's not what's happening. Your aunt says you're trying to make it happen. I'm not. I simply defended myself after he sued me. After a long silence, she asked softly, Can't you forgive him? I thought about the accident, the lawsuit, the lies, the insurance fraud, the damage to my apartment door, and months of wondering whether I'd lose everything because someone else refused to accept responsibility. I wanted to forgive him, I said quietly, but forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. We ended the call, and I sat by the window watching the city move on while my own life felt suspended between the cousin I'd grown up loving and the man I was about to face in court. A week later, Rebecca called. The judge confirmed the trial date. I took a slow breath. There was no turning back now. Ryan's attorney stood. Is it possible the brakes failed temporarily and later functioned normally? The expert answered without hesitation. In more than 23 years investigating collision vehicles, I've never seen evidence supporting that theory under circumstances like these. So, in your professional opinion? My opinion is that this collision was caused by driver behavior, not equipment failure. The judge quietly made a note. The dealership's service manager confirmed the Accord had passed its inspection only 3 weeks before the crash with no brake issues or recommended repairs. His testimony eliminated the final argument that the vehicle had been unsafe. Each answer chipped away at the story Ryan had spent months trying to build. Rebecca rose next. Your Honor, the plaintiff has repeatedly claimed the crash wasn't his fault. We'd now like to present the objective recording captured during the incident. She connected her laptop to the courtroom monitor, and the dashcam footage filled the screen. I'd watched that recording dozens of times, yet it still made my stomach tighten. The highway appeared, exactly as I remembered it. Ryan drove casually with the radio playing in the background, while the GPS speed slowly climbed, 70, 76, 83, then 87 miles per hour. I noticed the judge lean forward. The interior camera showed Ryan unlocking his phone, reading a notification, typing a reply, looking back at the road, then repeating the same pattern moments later. Ahead of him, traffic slowed and brake lights stretched across the highway, but he didn't react until the last possible second. The video clearly showed him slamming on the brakes. The front of the Accord dipped, the tires screamed against the pavement, and the car began slowing exactly as it should. It simply wasn't enough to overcome the speed he was traveling. Seconds later, the collision filled the screen. When the video ended, no one spoke. The silence in the courtroom wasn't awkward. It was the silence that settles over a room when the evidence has already answered the question. Ryan's attorney was the first to break it. The recording doesn't necessarily establish that the braking system was operating at peak efficiency. Rebecca stood almost immediately. It establishes brake application, she replied. The vehicle data confirms it. The physical inspection confirms it. The expert testimony confirms it. There is simply no evidence of mechanical failure. The judge nodded. I've reviewed the exhibits, I understand. Ryan eventually took the witness stand. He looked nothing like the confident cousin I remembered. His shoulders were rigid, his answers were noticeably shorter, and every response seemed more cautious than the last. His attorney led him through the familiar version of events. The brakes felt strange. I tried to stop. I lost control. When it was Rebecca's turn, she approached with nothing more than a yellow legal pad. Mr. Carter, you testified that the brakes felt abnormal. When did you first notice that? A few minutes before the crash. So you believed there might be a problem with the braking system?
Yes.
Rebecca kept her voice even. And despite believing your brakes might be failing, you continued driving? Yes. At approximately 87 miles per hour? Ryan hesitated. I didn't realize I was going that fast. Rebecca turned toward the courtroom monitor, where the GPS overlay was displayed again. Does this refresh your memory? He glanced at the screen before quietly answering. I guess. She continued without changing her tone. If you truly believed your brakes were failing, did you pull over? No. Did you contact roadside assistance? No. Did you call Natalie to warn her there might be a mechanical problem with her car? No. Rebecca let the silence linger for a moment. So your testimony is that you believe the brakes were unsafe, yet you continued driving nearly 90 miles an hour? Ryan shifted in his chair. I didn't think it was that serious. Rebecca nodded and moved to her next point. Let's talk about your phone. I wasn't texting. She opened another folder. These are records obtained directly from your mobile carrier. Copies were handed to both the judge and opposing counsel. They show outgoing text messages at 3:45 p.m. and again at 3:46 p.m. The collision occurred at approximately 3:48. She looked directly at him. Did those messages come from your phone? Ryan stared at the documents for several seconds before finally answering. Yes. So you were texting. I only sent a couple of messages. While driving 87 miles an hour? I didn't know my speed. Rebecca remained composed. The dashcam shows you overtaking multiple vehicles. Did it never occur to you that you were driving significantly faster than traffic around you? Ryan rubbed his forehead. I wasn't paying attention. She allowed his answer to settle over the courtroom before quietly repeating it. You weren't paying attention. No further questions. Ryan's attorney tried to soften the damage by arguing that his client had simply made a mistake, reminding the court that accidents happen and no one intentionally sets out to crash a vehicle. No one disputed that. The issue before the court wasn't the accident itself. It was everything Ryan chose to do afterward. Blaming a mechanical failure that didn't exist, filing an insurance claim built on that story, and suing me while accusing me of knowingly lending him an unsafe vehicle. The crash may have been an accident. Everything that followed wasn't. When closing arguments began that afternoon, Ryan's attorney urged the court to focus on uncertainty and argued there was still room for reasonable doubt. Rebecca stood calmly, walked toward the bench without theatrics, and gestured toward the exhibits spread across the courtroom. This case is far simpler than the plaintiff would like it to appear. Rebecca faced the judge with complete confidence. Your Honor, this case isn't complicated. We have maintenance records showing the vehicle was properly serviced, expert testimony confirming there was no mechanical defect, GPS data documenting the plaintiff's speed, cell phone records showing he was texting, and a dashcam recording that captures every second leading up to the collision. She paused just long enough for the courtroom to absorb the evidence. The only support for the brake failure theory comes from the same individual who was speeding, texting behind the wheel, and later filed false claims in an effort to shift responsibility onto the owner of the vehicle. Her eyes briefly met mine before returning to the judge. My client never wanted to be here. She lent her cousin a properly maintained car because she trusted him. When he crashed it, her first concern wasn't the damage to the vehicle, it was whether he had survived. Instead of accepting responsibility, he chose to make her bear the consequences of his own decisions. No one interrupted. Even Ryan kept his eyes fixed on the table. The judge thanked both attorneys and closed his notebook. I'll take the matter under advisement. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for my ruling. As everyone gathered their files, Ryan looked at me for the first time that day. There was something different in his expression. The confidence he'd carried for months was gone, replaced by uncertainty, as though he finally understood that charm and excuses couldn't overcome evidence. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting for an unrelated case, paying no attention to us as we walked past. Rebecca rested a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You did well. I don't feel like I've won. She glanced back toward the courthouse. You couldn't control what Ryan chose to do. You only controlled how you responded. Those words stayed with me all night. Despite everything Rebecca had said about the strength of our case, I barely slept. It wasn't fear of losing that kept me awake. I kept wondering whether there had been a single moment when Ryan could have stopped this entire nightmare, a phone call, an apology, or simply admitting what had really happened. Instead, we'd spent the last several months speaking through lawyers instead of his family. I arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes early the next morning. The hallway was unusually quiet. Ryan was already there, and for the first time since the accident, he looked exhausted rather than angry. Dark circles framed his eyes. His suit was wrinkled, and he looked as though he'd barely slept. We briefly met each other's gaze, but neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. When the courtroom doors opened, everyone stood as the judge took his seat. I've reviewed the testimony, documentary evidence, expert reports, and the arguments presented by both parties, he began. My hands were clasped so tightly in my lap that my fingers hurt. The court is prepared to rule. The room fell completely still. First, the plaintiff's complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Ryan lowered his head. The evidence does not support the allegation that the defendant negligently maintained her vehicle. The maintenance records establish the vehicle was properly serviced. Expert testimony confirmed the collision resulted from driver behavior, and the dashcam recording, together with GPS and cellular phone records, overwhelmingly demonstrates that the collision resulted from the plaintiff's own negligent operation of the vehicle. I let out a slow breath without realizing I'd been holding it. The judge turned another page. Second, the defendant's counterclaim is granted. He reviewed the award methodically. The plaintiff shall compensate Ms. Natalie Carter $18,500 for the fair market value of the totaled vehicle. The court also awards reasonable attorney's fees in the amount of $17,200. Ryan didn't react. Neither did his mother. Then came the part that seemed to affect him more than the money. The court finds the plaintiff's testimony lacked credibility. Objective evidence contradicted his account at nearly every significant point. A sharp crack echoed through the courtroom as the judge struck the gavel. This matter is concluded. The legal battle was over. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca smiled for the first time in months. I told you. I know. You don't seem happy. I glanced back at the courthouse entrance. I thought I'd feel relieved. And? I mostly feel sad. She understood immediately. Winning rarely feels like victory when the person on the other side used to be family. A week later, another letter arrived from my insurance company. Their reimbursement claim against Ryan had reached the same conclusion as the civil case. Because his negligence caused the collision, he was legally responsible for repaying the insurer for the amount they had paid on my claim. A few days later, Rebecca called with one final update. The district attorney reviewed the fraud referral. I held my breath. They've decided not to pursue criminal charges. Really? They cited limited resources, she explained. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. Ryan received a formal warning, and the attempted insurance fraud will remain on record. If anything similar happens again, he'll face far less lenient treatment. When we ended the call, I realized I felt relieved. Not because Ryan had escaped every consequence, but because sending him to prison had never been my goal. All I'd ever wanted was for the facts to matter. The consequences still caught up with him. Relatives told me his insurance premiums nearly doubled after the investigation. He eventually sold his vehicle because he could no longer afford to insure it, and the civil judgment made it harder to qualify for loans. Long after the crash, he was still living with the consequences of the decisions he made afterward. Our family never fully recovered. Thanksgiving was celebrated in 2 different houses. Christmas became 2 separate gatherings. My aunt never spoke to me again because, in her eyes, I'd ruined her son's future. For a long time, those words stayed with me. Then, one afternoon, my mother came over carrying 2 coffees and sat across from me on the same couch where she'd once asked me to settle. I owe you an apology. You don't? I do. She wrapped both hands around her cup before continuing. I kept telling you to be the bigger person because I thought I was protecting the family. Eventually, I realized the family didn't fall apart because you defended yourself. She met my eyes. It fell apart because Ryan expected everyone else to protect him from the consequences of his own choices. For the first time in months, I cried, not out of grief, but because someone finally understood. Grandma eventually stopped trying to reconcile everyone. During lunch one afternoon, she squeezed my hand and smiled. I don't understand all the legal details. I know. But I do know one thing. What? You've always told the truth. Those words meant more to me than the judge's ruling ever could. About 2 months later, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. It was Ryan. His message was short. I know you won. Congratulations. I hope you're happy knowing you ruined my life over a car. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I didn't ruin your life. You crashed my car while speeding and texting. You lied to the insurance company. You sued me for something I didn't do. Every consequence you're facing came from your own decisions. I simply refused to pay the price for them. I hit send. He never responded. That was the last conversation we ever had. A month later, I bought another certified pre-owned Honda. Walking into the dealership felt emotional. Not because it replaced the old Accord, because nothing ever could, but because it marked the beginning of a chapter that no longer revolved around defending myself. When the salesman handed me the keys, I realized I was finally ready to move forward. Before driving home, I made one more stop at an electronics store. I didn't buy new floor mats, a phone mount, or a better stereo. The first thing I bought was the exact same dual-facing dashcam I'd installed in my old Accord, complete with front and interior cameras and automatic cloud backup. As I mounted it to the windshield later that afternoon, I found myself smiling. $200. That small purchase had once protected far more than my car. It had protected my reputation, my financial future, and in the end, the truth. People still ask whether I regret lending Ryan my car. I don't. If that weekend had never happened, I probably would have spent the rest of my life believing he was simply a little careless. Instead, I saw who he became when accepting responsibility was harder than blaming someone else. People often say you discover a person's character when life is difficult. I think you discover it when accepting responsibility becomes harder than making excuses. Ryan believed our family would pressure me into accepting blame for decisions I never made. He believed I'd rather sacrifice my savings than force him to face the consequences of his own actions. He was wrong. I may never recover every dollar the court awarded me. Judgments don't always turn into money, and I made peace with that long ago. What mattered most wasn't the financial outcome. It was knowing I hadn't allowed someone else's lie to become my burden. That's the lesson I carried away from all of this. Protecting people from the consequences of their dishonesty isn't kindness. It only gives them permission to keep making the same choices. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do isn't rescuing someone you love. It's refusing to let them make you carry the cost of choices you never made.